all of you are doing well. Welcome to my channel, Oil and Gas Field Quality Control. Today I will have a knowledge sharing video. There are many standard drawings, scope of work, recommended practice, codes, qualification code, design code. So our minds are getting confused which one has to follow. So let us discuss this one little bit in detail today. What is code, what is standards, what are recommended practice, which one is applicable for our work or project. The great questions in our mind in relation with design code, qualification code, safety codes, general instructions, international standard, local standards, NDT interpretation standards, applicable standard as per project cutoff dates, scope of work and piping specification for the project, recommended practices, process industry practices, all of these which are mandatory or which is optional. Before going to each item, let us discuss what are standards and what are codes. Standards are a set of technical definitions and guidelines that functions as instruction for designers and manufacturers. The users are responsible for the correct application of the same. Compliance with the standards does not itself confer immunity from legal obligations. So now, what are the codes? Codes and laws are regulations that specify minimum standards to protect health and safety. Code is a group of general rules of systematic procedure for design, fabrication, installation, inspection that are adopted by legal jurisdiction and made into law. Codes are intended to set forth engineering requirements deemed necessary for safe design and construction of piping installation. A code has the force of law, unlike standards which are voluntarily accepted guidelines which becomes mandatory only when incorporated into a business contract. So, what is the relation between codes and standards? When a standard has been adopted by government bodies and has the force of law, it becomes a code. A standard also becomes a code when it has been incorporated into a business contract. A code is a set of rules that experts in the field recommend people to follow. It is a model. So code generally it is mandatory for the country we are working with, and standards can be international, it can be local. We will follow those standards which are only applicable for our project or scope of work. What are recommended practices? Recommended practices are documents prepared by professional group or committee indicating good engineering practices, but which are optional. Companies also develop their own recommended practices in order to have consistency in design and to avoid having one project differ substantially from others. What are the purpose of codes and standards? Codes and standards establish minimum acceptable levels of safety, quality, and reliability. Understanding the codes and standards at both the industry and government levels will allow us to better understand the expectation of our chosen field. What are the objectives of using a standard? To provide a minimum guideline to carry pipeline fabrication or erection to ensure that the work is carried out with project drawings and client project specification, to avoid common deficiencies and during installation, to minimize and reduce rework during the construction phase. They economize the system, reduce inventory, and ensure readily available backups from the market. They help in accumulation of knowledge. Also, the standard help us to avoid reinventing the wheel again. We will always take the expert gathered opinions and lesson learned, which is incorporated in a standard, to work with the easiest and shortcut method. Here are some examples of international standard and governing bodies. Each country has its own codes and standards. The major organizations in the world are shown in this table. ANSI is American National Standard Institute, which is from United States. You can go through this channel. For example, BSI is British Standards Unit, United Kingdom, whereas BIS is Bureau of Indian Standards, which is India's governing standards. ISO is International Organization for Standards worldwide. The American Petroleum Institute API standards. Some examples. API 5L is specification for line pipe, extensively used all over the world to define or manufacture the line pipes. API 6D for pipeline valves. API 598 is valve inspection and testing. API 1104 is standard for welding of pipeline and facilities. This is AISI, which is American Iron and Steel Institute. AISI 410 is 13% chromium alloy steel. AISI 316 is for 1883 austenitic stainless steel. Here are some reference from American National Standard Institutes, which is ANSI. B31.1 for power piping, 31.3 is process piping, 31.4 is pipeline transportation for liquid, 31.8 is for gas transportation pipelines. So these are the basic design codes of most of the process piping and pipelines all over the world. Some of the major ANSI and ASME standard I have listed here. You can stop the slide and go through. I will mention some of the important always we are using. For example, ASME B16.5 is for the steel pipe flanges and flange fittings, 16.20 for metallic gasket, 16.21 for non-metallic gasket and pipe flanges. B16.47 is for large diameter steel flanges from NPS 24 inch to 60 inch. American Society for Testing of Material, ASTM, this is being used extensively for material testing, civil, mechanical and everything. So basically it consists 16 sections on definitions and classifications of material, of construction and testing method. Most of the ASTM standards are adopted by ASME and are specified in ASME section 2. The section 2 has 4 parts. Part A is ferrous material, Part B is non-ferrous, Part C is welding material, whereas Part D is for properties of materials. American Welding Society or AWS provide the information on welding fundamentals, weld design, welders training, testing and inspection of the welds and guidance on the application and use of welds. Individual electrode manufacturer has given their brand names for the various electrodes and same are sold under these names. American Water Works Association, for your information only, AWWA, this is being used for low pressure water services and naturally it is less stringent than other standards. The manufacturer's Standardization Society for Valves and Fittings Industry, they are using the standard practices, the abbreviation of which is MSSSP standards. This is actually, you can say, a recommended and standard practices. They are followed by manufacturer. These are published and advisory standard and widely followed all over the world. The most common MSSSP standards referred for piping are listed in this table below. MSSSP 56, for example, is pipe hanger supports, SP 67 for butterfly valves, SP 72 is ball valves, and so on. Here are some British standards. In many instances, it is possible to find a British standard which may substitute for American standards. For example, BS 2080 is British standard for face-to-face or end-to-end dimension of valves. Is identical to ANSI or ASME B16.10. There are certain British standards referred by Indian manufacturer for piping and valves. The most commonly referred British standards in the piping industry are listed in the table. If you need to see, you can stop the slide and go through. Here are some list of Indian standards. Something I want to mention about Indian standards, that they have not so far developed any standard for design of piping system. Hence, ANSI standards ASME B31.1, 31.3 are widely used for the design. These standards also accept materials covered in other standards. Unlike American standard, Indian standards cover dimensions and material specification under the same standard number. There are no groups based on the branch of engineering. Some of the most commonly referred Indian standards I have listed here. Now, design code based on project work scope and client requirement. This code is being selected. We will take one example for one of my project. Here our design code is ASME B31.8, which is for gas transmission pipelines. Construction code is API 1104 because B31.8 is referring API 1104 for this purpose. Construction code from our client is SAS L450 for pipeline and L350 for the piping portion. Whenever we read a code or standard, we should go through the scope of the work. Some of the scope I have notified as a sample for our project. Our design code scope, which covers the design, fabrication, installation, inspection and testing of pipeline facilities used for transportation of gas. The code also covers safety aspects of the operation and maintenance of those facilities. Even the code mentioned very clearly it is not applied to. You can go through by stopping the slide. Here is the scope of construction code, API 1104, 22nd edition, July 2021. These standards cover the gas and arc welding of butt weld, fillet weld joints in the carbon and low alloy steel pipe and piping components used in the compression, pumping and transmission of crude petroleum products, fuel gases, carbon dioxide, nitrogen and where applicable covers welding of distribution system also, and so on. So reading the scope of work is very important. So this design code, construction code are all mandatory parts which we should follow in combination, and also the client or company standards. We took the work from them, so we need to follow the local standard and company standards also. Here are the scope of the construction code from the client. This standard supplements all the API 31.4 and 31.8 transportation piping codes and defines additional construction requirement for governing onshore pipelines. That means all the requirements for 31.4 or 31.8, which are design code, need to be followed, and additionally we need to follow the restrictions also mentioned in the client standard. Scope of the construction code for piping. This is also supplements of API B31 codes and defines additional requirements governing the fabrication and installation of metallic plant piping systems. So the scope of any standards and code will tell you what exactly it is about, what is included in the standards or code, what is excluded from these standards. So this is very important when selecting any applicable codes and standard for the project. Applicable code based on the project cutoff date is also very important. Latest standard should not always be followed. We should follow the project cutoff date standard because latest standard might have some more requirement which is cost effective. Any contractor will never accept that. So qualification code for WPS, PQR and welder, it can be ASME section 9, API 1104 and AWS D1.1 for structural work. Qualifying standard, welding procedure and welder performing the work, new construction out of service pipeline shall be qualified under section 9 or API 1104. For in-service welding, we need to follow API 1104. Procedure qualified welder appendix B are also suitable for weld deposition repair, provided procedure is appropriate for the remaining wall thickness to which it is being applied. So this para is from the design, is from our design code of our project, which referring API 1104 or section 9 wherever it is suitable. So this reference is important why we are following API 1104 or section 9. So design code is the first mandatory things, and it will refer other codes and standards, and your scope of work also will define you which codes and standard you must follow. So those are all applicable project standards. NDT interpretation code B31.8 for both non-shower and shower service. You can read this para. They are referring API 1104 for interpreting the NDT results. Here is a small table where we can see the applicable standards. For example, design code can be 31.3, 4 and 8 based on the project scope. Construction code can be API 1104, client standard SAS L450, 350. NDT interpretation for pipeline is API 1104. These are only sample, there are many. So I am taking an example of our project. NDT interpretation for piping is B31.3 if it is a process piping. If it is a pipeline, it will again follow API 1104 requirements for interpreting the NDT results. WPS qualification code can be API 1104 or ASME section 9. ASME section 9 is widely adopted because of its flexibility. API 1104 is kind of restricted with many groupings. The latest edition of API 1104 give a lot of relaxation compared to the older editions. WPS qualification code for structural is AWSD 1.1 for steel. You can see all the AWS here. For example, AWSD 1.6 for stainless steel structural welding. Recommended practice MSS SP6, for example, standard finishes for contract surfaces for flanges. Process industry practice. This is an organization where all experts, they are member, and they are always developing some engineering practices and procedures. If we are member of this PIP, we can directly tap the practices from them to execute our capital project consistently and cost effectively. This will save some time and effort from us because the practices they made, this is all already proven and contributed by experts of this industry. Standard drawings, it is provided by client. Some example I have put it in the table. For example, the first drawing is for branch connection. A lot of types of branch connection which are readily over there. If our IFC drawing mentions some type of branch connection, you can readily accept the dimensions and instruction from the standard drawing. No need any special approval. Codes are local country codes and safety rules. For example, handling radiography isotopes is always we need to follow the country rules. Scope of work is project scope of work. It will define some special restrictions or give you some relaxation for specific project. General instruction is basically issued for safety. It will give you pressure testing safety. It will give you certification of cable splicer, many issues, but this mandatorily to be followed if you are working in a specific country. Company client codes and standards also is mandatory to follow all the restrictions apart from the international standards and design codes. Hope you guys understands the project applicable standards, how to select, what one need to be followed, which one we can avoid. If you have any questions, you can write in the comment box. I will try to answer. If you like my channel, please share with your friends, subscribe, and don't forget to put a like. Thanks a lot. Signing off, Showman.